Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage, Guru Parulkar.
Okay, folks, it's very, very nice of you to stay until the end. Really appreciate it. And we have three very distinguished panelists who will make your stay worthwhile. I can guarantee you, I have known them for many years, and they have been part of SDN all along. So, our topic is state of SDN. What are the opportunities, what are the challenges, what we heard over the last couple of days, and these people will help us make sense out of that. Let me do very, very quick introduction. We don't have that much time. So let me start with Guido Appenzeller. So Guido, you're welcome to come and join. So Guido, you may know him most for founder of Big Switch Networks, CEO, and recently he has assumed a new role, and we will talk to him about that in just a minute. I had a pleasure of working with Guido at Stanford for a couple of years. We got some of the OpenFlow SDN stuff going together, and I have very, very fond memories of that. He is definitely very sharp, one of the sharpest person, both engineering wise as well as his aptitude for marketing and all of that. So really appreciate him participating. Our second panelist was supposed to be Stu LB from Verizon. He tells me that he got an important business meeting, so he cannot be here at ONS. So I think you should all take a note of it. He thought there is a business meeting that is more important than ONS. But I am so delighted that Pradeep has generously, kindly agreed to be on the panel, and Pradeep has been part of this movement from very beginning as well. And not only that, he is started the whole NFV movement 2 years ago. And as his co-conspirator Don Clark tells me that they started talking about NFV in the parking lot at ONS. So ONS can take some credit for inspiring or getting the NFV going as well, and we are of course very synergistic. Pradeep, please come and join us. Last but not the least, Vijay Pandey from IBM. He has been at Blade, Alteon, then Nortel, then Blade, and then IBM now. He's the CTO for networking at IBM. And we will talk to him about what IBM is trying to do with networking, right? With all the stuff that is going on. Okay, come on, Vijay. Okay, so let me start with Guido. So Guido, as I gave you a little bit of warning, right? You have 1 minute to tell this audience what happened at Big Switch during the last 1 year. It started out in 2013 in ONS, the hottest SDN company. And today I would rate it as a hot SDN company. And a lot of the news that came out. So I'll give you 1 minute to kind of settle that, then we will get to the topic of the panel, okay?
Sounds great. So first of all, I obviously disagree of the hot versus hottest, but we'll work that out later. Looking back at Big Switch, Big Switch has done a little bit of a pivot, in the last 12 months. If you look back at when we started, so our approach of going to market was to say, we'll build a controller, and then we'll work with a variety of switch vendors to go to market. So basically, we sell our controller, they sell their switches, and with that, we deliver solutions. And practically speaking, it turned out that that didn't work. Right? And I think Rob said that already. There's sort of two key reasons for that. And the first one is really that we found it very difficult to innovate at the speed that we wanted to if someone else controls the switch. Right? The network silicon vendors at the moment, they're innovating at a rapid pace. The new features that are coming out in networking chips are, from my perspective, absolutely amazing. So a new feature comes out, and what happens next, right? The feature comes out, the NDA expires, the Open Networking Foundation adds that to the OpenFlow standard. We're probably at this point, a year into the process or so, right? At that point, the switch vendors start implementing that in their switches, and then we can start developing the application on top. So it'll take us years after a new feature comes out to really deliver the value, right? And that was a big problem for us, right? As a startup, what you really want to do is you want to build best of breed software. And so we we did a bit of a pivot that, in retrospect, I think was the best decision we've ever made in the history of the company, right? So, early last year we said we're going to de-emphasize working with fully integrated switches, and we're going to really focus on white box, or more precisely, bare metal switches. Right? And we've had for a very long time had our own switch software, but basically at this point, the majority of our deployments going forward, I would expect to be on bare metal switches, right? Switches where basically we provide the software that runs on the switch. And that turned out to be a fantastic decision because it meant several things. I mean, first of all, we can really innovate, right? We took the chance to re-engineer our solution. I think today, the solution that we have is vastly better than it was before, right? It also means bare metal switches have very attractive economics for the buyer, right? If you're building, a private cloud or something like that, and you really want to get to the kind of economics that, for example, Amazon has, doing that with brand name switches is very difficult, right? Just because, of cost. And, with bare metal switches, you can do that. And, I think the results are that we've had a fantastic Q4 last year. We're really now seeing very large-scale deployments, thousands of 10 gigabit ports with large customers where they're really putting our software in production. And so, in retrospect, I'm super happy about the decision. I think we found a great new course.
Okay, so I think you gave a very nice explanation of technically what changed. I was more interested in business-wise, but I will not push you right now. Okay, that conversation we can have some other time. But I think the other thing I wanted to ask you, you heard in last couple of days, open source is a big deal. I mean, everybody is now talking about open source and how open source is going to have a big impact and so on. Big Switch started with an open source strategy, and it appears Big Switch has taken a step back towards open source strategy and now focusing. So enlighten us that in terms of, I don't want to again focus primarily on Big Switch, but I want to hear, because I know you have thought through a lot, what open source is going to do or what role it is going to play in SDN and success of SDN. So I'm more interested in hearing your ideas about open source, and whatever in the context of Big Switch, if you can.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm personally a huge believer in open source, and I'm speaking for Big Switch when I say Big Switch is also a huge believer in open source. You're absolutely right when we changed the strategy there, right? We used to put a lot of emphasis on Floodlight, which was the open source sort of base of our controller, and I think this was very much driven by, many of our early customers and partners were very interested in essentially writing their own software modules, on a controller platform. What we found is that as we sort of SDN became more mainstream, we got out of the early adopters, more into the sort of majority of customers, that emphasis shifted a little bit, right? I mean, if you're, my favorite customer, at the moment is an apparel retailer, that in California. They're a very innovative company, but they're not quite the same as, say, a Google or Verizon, in terms of they don't have a large development team. They're looking much more for a turnkey solution that solves a specific problem very, very well, right? And, for that kind of scenario, having a programmable platform is far less important, right? It's much more important to have a turnkey solution, something that can deploy and quickly get up and running, right? I mean, on the other hand, on the switch side, we've actually doubled down on open source, right? I'm not sure if you saw the announcement. It was actually, it was part of the opening keynote here. Together with the Open Compute project, there's a thing called Open Networking Linux, where we have an entirely open source operating system for bare metal switches, right? Which is coming from us that we're supporting. We collaborated with Cumulus on ONI. Most of the credit goes to Cumulus, but I think it's another great effort. I mean, if you look at networking, today, back in the days when we were still at Stanford, there was actually a T-shirt that we printed at Stanford which said, "It's time to innovate in your network," right? Because back then you couldn't, right? You could buy a switch, but the switch was closed. It had no API. You couldn't put new software on it because the bootloader was locked. If you could obtain a bare metal switch, which we actually eventually did, and it involved going to the port of Oakland and actually getting the thing through customs, right? You had to order it directly from Taiwan. You didn't have a base operating system. You didn't have a base SDK, right? That all has changed, right? Networking has never been as open as it has today. And today you can get a bare metal switch very easily, right? You can go to Amazon and type in Quanta switch or Acton switch, whatever your favorite vendors. You can just buy them there. Or you can go to Dell most recently, who is now selling switches with third-party software. We're now providing the baseline Linux that runs on this. I'm not sure if everybody saw that Broadcom on Monday had an announcement where for the first time ever, they actually have an easily accessible API to the switching chips that does not require an NDA. So you can go to GitHub and just download it and start developing, right? So you can now basically write your own forwarding agent. So basically, we now have a complete open source stack for all the switches.
So,
right? And that's what we're currently focusing on.
So let me summarize it quickly. So what you're saying is that little layer that you want to layer on top of the switch, that is where you are focusing your energy on for open source.
Yeah.
But building the open source controller, you are saying the customers that you are targeting, they don't care as much about that open source and being programmable. So you want to give them complete solution, and that doesn't need to be for big switch business plan. That being open source is not as critical. But in general, you believe that open source is good for SDN.
Absolutely. And you know, this is also for us, we're still a relatively small company, right? For us, it's a question of priorities.
Sure.
Where do we put our resources, right?
Okay.
We love open source. We're all about open, right? It's a question of where do we take our code and clean it up, make it accessible, put it out there for people to use, and where will this happen at a later stage?
Okay. So before I move on to Pradeep, I have last question for you, then we'll come back. So what did you hear in last 2.5 days that either surprised you or you thought this is something important that you want to make sure that audience here understood it as well? So
if I have to pick two things here that I think I'm most excited about, it's actually one is open source, right? Because we're seeing a lot of things happening. It's all over the conference. The other is bare metal switches. Because the combination of these two things really, I think for the first time in networking history, really allow you to innovate by yourself, right? I mean, back in the days, you need to be a very large organization in order to try out, say, a new networking algorithm or a new networking technology, because basically everything was closed off, and you need a lot of critical mass to break in there. To paraphrase Vinod from yesterday, it was a 100% cathedral, 0% bazaar, back then. And that has really come full circle, right? Today, you have all the pieces. If you have a good idea about networking, you really have no excuse not to try that out in practice, right? If it's a really good idea, you should probably start a company around that, because I think this is the right time to do that. We're seeing lots of startups. We're seeing new hardware. We're seeing new software. We're seeing new controllers. I think Matthew List from Goldman talked about this. This sudden explosion of innovation, right? And I think that to me is an incredibly good sign about how vibrant the community is, and I'm really happy how that has evolved.
Okay. So let me see if I can move on to Pradeep. So Pradeep, first of all, congratulations on what you have done with NFV. I mean, you can see NFV is getting traction even at ONS. That's a big deal, and SDN and NFV coming together, that is also big. So congratulations. I think you should really feel very good about it. But let me come back to now the company first then. So, you heard John Donovan come and talk, painted a very big vision in terms of big transformational changes, both infrastructure-wise, organizationally, processes, placing big bets on SDN, NFV. So how do you react to that?
So I'd like to thank him for doing that. He's really, put all of our whole industry at notice. What I'll say is that, yes, definitely John made a big statement about the plans for their company. But if you look at all the talks we've heard through this conference, you saw many other operators presenting real examples of what they're doing in proof of concepts and trials, pre-deployment. I think that's the important message here, that this year we're moving into people actually presenting real-world deployment examples or real-world deployment scenarios which they're about to enter into. I think that's the big message. Yes, each of us will do it in our own way. Some will take the grand approach, vision approach, which again I commend AT&T for doing, and others will take, baby steps or small steps to get to a similar goal.
So you think service providers, especially carriers, are really able to bring about the kind of transformation that he is talking about, or what maybe Verizon is talking about, cutting down those from 18 months to shorter time frame, working with startups, changing all these processes even, so is that something that carriers are well positioned to do, or their processes are so entrenched that this is going to be too difficult, or it may be another 10 years before it happens?
I think the urgency is there to do something. I mean, all of us face competition at every level in every domain we operate. And we cannot afford not to do something. So Again, different people will follow a different path. It is difficult. All the things he mentioned that we have to, he's trying to do, all of us have to do in our own ways, changing operations, changing processes, changing how we procure things. All of those will have to happen. Now, whether it happens all at once or we start small in certain areas and then grow it, that's a different matter.
So for Verizon, rather than talking about AT&T, let's focus on Verizon. So what do you think Verizon is doing? On one hand, Verizon has been a big champion of SDN from very beginning. I mean, you and Stu have been involved in SDN from very beginning. Actually, I remember having a conversation with Stu in OFC like almost 5-6 years ago, where he was articulating this whole commodity switches and open source. He was saying all the right things, but not much has happened as far as I can tell, as far as Verizon is concerned, externally. So what can you share with us?
So again, we've been all doing things in our own way. We've been doing proof of concepts internally. We've been working with our suppliers and vendors to get to the solutions we want. It's also a question of evolution of our vision. So, and I think it sort of parallels what has happened in terms of this conference too. In the early years, a few conferences ago, it was more about the wire protocol, more about the cool things you could do once you had that programmability, but there was mainly looked to us more like toy applications, which are fine for a campus, but do not scale. Mm-hmm. And this year, you're seeing people actually talking about the programmability of the networks, what you can do at the higher layers. And I think the discussion is focusing to where it really should, from our point of view, that is in the layers above where you can manipulate the network from an application perspective or a service perspective. And I think to get to where we want to go, a lot of development has to happen in that space. We need tools there, we need operation support things there, which allow us to manipulate our network as a whole. And when I say as a whole, I don't mean all our possible networks together, but any particular domain, we need to look at it holistically. And to do that, we need all sorts of orchestration, automation, things which we do not have now. And just having the programmability at the individual switch level, et cetera, does not quite help. I mean, it helps definitely. I wouldn't say it doesn't quite help. It's not enough. So
from your carrier perspective, all this excitement about bare metal switches and open source, is this community is getting ahead of itself, or you think carriers would anytime soon consider even bare metal switches and open source based solutions?
So I'll separate those two things. And I think if you see what's happening in the controller development community with OpenDaylight, for example, right? So it's a controller being done in open source. It has both open flow-based interfaces as well as legacy interfaces to interface to our existing networks. So I think that's where more, so when we talk about open source, I think that's a good example of the use of open source from our perspective. That is, it provides a framework for interoperability. In the telecom world, we've always been used to doing standards, and you spend some time defining what you want to do, what the interfaces should be, what the specifications on those interfaces are, and you go ahead and get consensus, and you spend a couple of years trying to get those standards. Then you get people to build stuff. And we want to cut down that cycle, and we're looking for ways to go beyond our normal trajectory. And some of us in this NFV community we've created really believe that open source is a way to get that interoperability faster. Reference implementations, or whatever the framework is, do it in open source, and with collectively, I think, is a much better way of standardizing those interfaces and coming up with interoperability. So I think that's where we see the value, and in the coming months, year, we'd like to push for that.
How about any apps or use cases that Verizon cares about on top of SDN? Any guidance you can give to the community?
I would actually recommend that if you haven't looked at it, You should go and look at the list of use cases we have on the at CNFV website. That was a collective effort by a large group of carriers. We have 28 carriers on board, global carriers, all the major ones, who collectively got together and developed a set of use cases which they're interested in. Now, we all have different business priorities, different goals, so not all of us are interested in all the use cases, but that collection is an excellent collection of use cases which show the carrier interest, and I think each of the use cases also have attribution to which operators are requesting. So I think that's a very good start. If you see our names on it, we're interested in it. And associated with that, there have been proof of concepts which have been launched from that effort. There's 9 proof of concepts now which have been launched, and 3 of them I think were shown in Mobile World Congress last year. Multi-vendor, supported by carriers. And again, they're pushing what we want to try and emphasize. It's interoperability is key for us. We need multiple vendors to come up with the pieces of the solution and work together. And that's, I would recommend looking at those use cases. And the other thing I'd like to say is it's very gratifying to hear at this conference people were using both terms in the same breath, SDN and NFV. Which is something, though we hadn't explicitly talked about in the past, when Stu and I used to come here, right from the beginning, that is what we believe, that these two things need to come to work together in our networks for us to get any value of it. We can't use one without the other. I can't do virtualization of my network functions if I now cannot move it without having to wait for the network to be configured over the wide area. So I need both together. So that is gratifying to see people are paying attention and trying to put these together.
Any takeaways from last 2.5 days that you want to share with the audience? What did you learn, or what did you find some interesting,
I think I've said a couple of things. One is that the emphasis is moving into usability of this whole approach from an application perspective, and some emphasis on the tools you need to do that. That's one. Other real-world use cases being demonstrated outside the data center. I mean, we've heard of the data center and cloud provider use cases before, but in the wide area. And the third thing was the recognition that these two concepts need to work hand in hand for our kind of deployments. So.
Okay, thank you. So let me ask a few questions to Vijay and then go from there. So Vijay, first, I think, what's IBM up to? Selling their hardware business, now rumors that they're selling SDN business for $1 billion. So what's going on?
So I can't comment about the larger IBM organization.
I know.
But I think as far as $1 billion go, if you give it to me, I'll take it. I don't think IBM is interested in taking it. So we, unfortunately or fortunately, stay within IBM. So SDN is a crucial piece in IBM strategy. So we just announced a product at OpenDaylight, SDN VE, which is a unified controller, which does OpenFlow as well as overlays in the same controller based on OpenDaylight. We shipped that product around a week ago. So it's now a GA product which you can buy. So in addition to that, what's been happening is we are being aligned very strongly with our cloud organization as well. So a lot of the work that we will be doing going forward will be aligned to the cloud services organization that IBM is trying to get its hands around. So we had a few cloud offerings earlier. Smart Cloud was the brand, and then we acquired SoftLayer last year. So we will get better aligned to that business.
So then does that mean IBM in that thing will compete with Amazon, Microsoft Azure, and Google Public Cloud? Maybe it is already competing. So that is...
Publicly, the intentions are to build a credible hybrid cloud solution, which is so provided as a service, as well as an on-premise stack, which can help you build your own private cloud. So yes, in some senses, we are trying to get towards that space. We have an offering which is also competing against the AWS kind of offering. So we, I think, just announced at Pulse last week, this thing which we call Bluemix or Cloud OE, which is a API marketplace. It's a bunch of services that you can use, as a DevOps community and build your applications on top of that. So we are going in that market in a big way.
And so there again, you would use SDN, that is the plan, SDN and virtualization and network virtualization and so
Absolutely. So one of the main goals is to use this SDN VE platform that we have for both network virtualization, the NFV pieces, OpenFlow in a hybrid cloud environment. So without talking more behind what goes into it, but you can imagine, I mean, you heard the talks from Amin and Albert, so there is that notion behind our product as well.
So you have been, of course, very much involved in OpenDaylight. So I want to ask you a few questions about OpenDaylight, but don't give us the same lecture again that ODL is working great, how many developers, how many lines of code. So we know all of that, right? So understood. So, but still tell me, what are the 2 or 3 things that have worked well for ODL? But I also want to make sure you tell me 3 things that have not worked. Because every talk I hear about ODL, I hear all the benefits of open source that we already know. So still love to hear what has not worked as well. Go for it.
Sure. So let me start with the good stuff,
Okay,
right?
sure.
So I think so we've achieved a good momentum behind it. So I think less than a year getting a release out with not just one project but multiple projects together. So it's a simultaneous release with less than a year of time frame behind us from conception to delivery is a great achievement. And I think we have targeted, at least in this release, some very important use cases. So we've got overlays in there. So for network virtualization, we've got OpenFlow in there. We've got some good OpenFlow applications in there. So we've got some security applications in there. So I think there's a good roundup of useful applications all working together. So that's the good piece. There's a good community behind it, like Jonah was saying earlier. So we are building that community. And it's not just vendors. We are seeing students, we're seeing operators, we're seeing all over, I mean, people from not just the US, but all over the world coming together in this. So those are the good things. There's momentum behind it. In terms of the goal, we would like to get to a point where the way you think about Linux, we want you to think about ODL. So nobody blinks twice before thinking about Linux, using Linux in their product. And we would like to think of ODL in the same way in the SDN space. So if you're thinking about data control separation, use ODL without blinking, right? And build your value around it.
I guess, as you know, as Jim Zemlin himself has said, that anytime you start an open source project, the best analogy and most inspiring thing you can say is we want to be the Linux of, and then use whatever the particular domain
Absolutely.
is. So that is the most, so okay, understood.
So I think you're looking for all the holes, and I'll find the holes, right?
I mean, because that's what, like, every time I hear a talk about ODL, I hear all these things, and that's good. I mean, you want to always hear that, but then you want to hear some objective analysis.
Sure. So I think, so one of the biggest things that we are trying to tackle in the next release is, I mean, we are new. So we just got all of these projects together. We tested it, but I think we could do a little bit more around integration testing, a little bit more around making sure that all the bugs are ironed out. So I think stability is a big to-do item for the next release, because we don't want anybody to have a bad experience with it. We haven't heard any, but we want to make sure that whoever deploys it has a good experience around it. So that's number one. Number two is around usability. So it's a framework, and I think that's one thing that I want to point out to everybody, that just like OpenStack, it's a framework. ODL is a framework. It's not an end product. Now, that having said that, even as a framework, when you want to download something and maybe run a simple application, deploy it, run a simple application, just become comfortable with the product or the framework itself, I think there are some usability issues around it. So just getting the code to a point where somebody can download it without going on the IRC and going and asking for help on the email list, I think that's another crucial thing that we want to do. So these are, I think, the two main issues. Other things, I think we are getting a whole bunch of projects in there, so trying to figure out what makes sense, but that's not the job of the TSC. It's an open source community, so whatever is of interest gets worked on. So we won't put our foot in that.
Okay. So what are your 2 or 3 takeaways from ONS this year?
So I think what we've been seeing, at least in this year's ONS, is a lot more concrete example of how things have been deployed. And I think NTT, Google, Microsoft, and a whole bunch of other places, we've seen some real world examples of how things are being deployed. The one thing I would say is the opportunity or the missed opportunity around SDN, not deploying SDN, was, I think, best stated by Francois from Siena. I mean, he described that Mobile World Congress example in Barcelona, and everybody in that geographic location got value out of the whole bunch of people coming in there, except the networking people. And I think the way, we all know that, but I think the way he put it in context just should light a fire under a whole bunch of people, right? That you need to get this deployed. So I think that was very, very interesting. The open source pieces definitely were very, very interesting as well.
Yeah, but I thought in case of Francois, another thing he said, and again, it should have been obvious all along, and maybe it is obvious to some of you, that sometimes we describe the control plane in terms of abstractions and all of that, and that is okay. But he said that, bring me all the data, and then I want to do analytics and make decisions, right? And be able to have the parallel between how Amazon makes decisions, how Google makes decisions. I should be able to make those kinds of decisions, and at that rate. I thought that articulation of what SDN brings to me was also interesting and something I have not internalized, but listening to him made me think that way.
So just like OpenDaylight, I'll say there are some holes as a community, I think.
Go ahead, yeah, please.
Even the way we are approaching this. So we've seen some concrete examples of how these things are deployed, but they've been mostly in the service provider space, in the large web scale companies, but regular enterprise data centers, I think, still are struggling with what value SDN brings to them. And there's a lot of information there. There's a lot of noise out there. We are at fault as well. So we talk about 10 diverse things, maybe 100 diverse things, and put it all under the bucket of SDN. So there's a lot of confusion for people. I mean, imagine a whole bunch of people who cannot come to these conferences, who cannot understand what SDN truly means. They hear a vendor speak. So I think the NFV guys have done a very good job of outlining use cases and what matters where, what technology matters where. I think for the SDN side of things, for the enterprise data center, I think something similar needs to be done. So
you think that is where ONF could play a bigger role?
I mean, that could be. I mean, one thing, like when you said the ABC and the C part of it, one part could be that talk about enterprise data center use cases and talk about technologies, what makes sense and what can bring value to those.
So tell me something. I mean, my assumption is that almost most of the SDN startup companies, or even SDN companies, startup or non-startups, are focusing primarily on enterprise data centers. That is my kind of assumption, because you're not going to go and sell it to Google or Microsoft or something. So if you're going after the data center space, and that is the space where the SDN has the largest or biggest traction, so isn't that the enterprise data center? Isn't that, I mean, it's a big switch. I mean, I would think so, right? So what do you think?
We're certainly focused on the data center, and that's where we have our deployments at the moment. We're not exclusively data center. We're definitely not only enterprise. We have deployments in service providers and sort of more internet type companies. I mean, I think from our perspective, this is incredibly pragmatic. The data center is very attractive right now because there's very fast refresh cycles, right? There's a lot happening there. With virtualization, the rules are completely changing, right? Number of end hosts, the management schemes. With OpenStack, there's a big movement towards highly automated automation, and a lot of change is good, right? That means the rate of innovation is much more important than incumbency, which helps startups.
So, but still coming back to Vijay's point, what can we do as a community to accelerate the adoption of SDN into the different segment? And can we specify use cases? Can we educate that market as a community rather than each individual company trying to go and educate the market? I guess that is the point you're trying to make, right? So is there a scope for that? I mean, that rather than each company doing it, we can do it as a community as well, and then of course each company will do its own part as well, obviously.
I think what's behind that question is a little the question, what is holding SDN back at the moment? Right? Why has SDN not taken over the world yet? Right? And there's still about 6 billion people that are not using SDN as of last count, or 7. And I think right now, from our perspective, for a long time it was a lack of availability of switches. Right? I mean, frankly, finding switches that have an SDN implementation is relatively easy. Find one that has all the features that we need was always very hard, right? And that's why bare metal for us is fantastic. Right? I think at this point, the products are either there or almost there, right? And we have products that are easy to deploy, relative. I think where there's a sufficient critical feature set. I think at this point it's just about building momentum. And in some cases, also still to flesh out feature sets. I mean, that's I think what we are seeing in our customer base. As a startup, you develop a little bit tunnel vision, trying to solve your problems. I'm not sure I have all the answers here, but I mean, I think taking the successes that are there and publicizing them is something that's very, very helpful for the community overall, right? Taking the cases where companies have successfully deployed SDN, turning that to case studies and disseminating that. I think that's very, very valuable.
So, if I can add to the issue, right? So I think if you look at, again, all the use cases that you saw today, I mean, all of these companies are big companies with a large networking capability behind them, right? And I think if you heard Matt from Goldman talk about his list of things that he's tried every permutation combination out there, right? But he's still not convinced, or if he's not there or whatever, right? So I think there's confusion, and we need to somehow, as a community, figure out how to.
Yeah, so
go ahead.
Yeah, so I think we're all sort of saying the same thing, that all of us understand the benefits and of the vision, and understand how this will help us, but articulating that in business terms, and articulating the value in any specific use case or set of use cases, that has been lacking. It's very hard to quantify some of this, that, okay, this is a benefit, but what does it mean in the end in terms of the business value? That has been very hard to do, especially since initially when we started down this path, original thought was, well, this is a CapEx saving journey, but it turns out it's not. Right? The OpEx is the real savings is. And that is very hard to quantify, the value of that OpEx savings. And so I think some of the adoption questions you're asking, especially in enterprise, because our customers come to us, our enterprise customers come to us and ask us the same questions. How do we quantify that value to them? Yes, we can wave our hands and say all the nice things we say philosophically, and they make sense, but at the end of the day, can we quantify it in a way that makes sense?
Okay, I've been asking too many questions, so I guess I want to open it up to the audience and see whether you folks have some questions, because I can keep asking questions, but go ahead.
First of all, thanks to the panel and the event. I have been having a lot of fun. Question to the panel. Do we have any parallels or intersections between ONF and the IETF? And the reason that I'm asking this, because I think Pradeep made an earlier comment during the week, so that's the question.
Pradeep, you made some comments, so maybe you are the person who should start out.
It was a facetious comment on Sunday. So I was on a panel on Sunday, and I just made the comment that it's perhaps portentous that we have ONS happening simultaneously with IETF.
Oh.
Maybe that's a transition of networking, moving from the old world to the new world.
Oh, we tried to avoid it, but it just so happened. Okay.
It was just for fun.
But I guess you want to seriously, want to say how IETF and ONF, or how should these two communities interact, or what the roles are?
So I think there's a place for both. As you know, all of us have large networks with all of the IETF stuff embedded in there. It's not going away. We do need that. So it's, some people have framed it as as an adversarial thing that, no, we need to throw out all the IETF protocols and work with this. That's not going to happen. We need to work together, and there are signs of that. There are there's work going on in IETF which directly address SDN-related issues and problems, and real attempts to try and solve those with the recognition that not all SDN problems can be solved at the open flow level. So they're working on that. I think that's the answer. All of these forums need to work together and not be in a competition.
Yeah, I think so.
Guido, go ahead.
If I think about our product, I'm not sure how many RFCs we implement, but it's probably a couple of dozens. Right? And, you know, they're very complementary. You know, I think movements that at the end, you need both of them, right? I think the ONF currently has no interest in actually standardizing the wire protocols that just do the data transfer, right, or replacing TCP or something like that. I mean, that wouldn't make much sense, in my opinion. You know, on the other hand, I think, you know, OpenFlow, you know, I think is fundamentally a great protocol, and the ONF keeps driving that forward, and it seems to be the right home for it. So I think there's no urgency to change that.
Dija, you have anything to say?
No, I think nothing more to add to that. I think I would just say that we have to make sure as a community that they are complementary. I mean, they are right now, but we just have to make sure through the correct liaisons that they are complementary.
Okay. Bob?
So my question is sort of for all the panelists, because you all articulated the importance of applications. At Big Switch, it's about the solutions for customers. For carriers, it's about the value that SDN adds. And for OpenDaylight, it's about the applications also that run on top of it. So my question for all of you is, what are the really kind of cool, exciting applications that deliver real value to customers and users, et cetera, that make you and or your customers jump up and be really excited and say, this is so great, we can do this with SDN and it would just be difficult, impossible, or we couldn't do it at all with legacy networking, but SDN gives us this new application capability. What are your favorite exciting applications that make you jump up?
It seems like an open invitation for a sales pitch here.
Still, I think that's a good question. So what are the compelling applications you have come across so far?
I mean, just for us, right, and this is not speaking for everybody here, right now in the enterprise data center, we're basically building fabrics, right? So either data center fabrics, if you have your own little private cloud or so, and you basically want to forward packets, very efficiently, and with bare metal switches, which are cheaper, but more importantly, as you pointed out, most of the cost saving at the end of the day is actually in the OpEx. So doing this in a highly automated way, where you can get away from individual system administrators logging into switches and instead go to a centralized model, whereas you plug into OpenStack and get a lot of self-service provisioning. So basically highly automated data center provisioning with virtualization. And then second product is basically a monitoring fabric. If you want to aggregate vast amounts of tap traffic or span traffic, for debugging, for certain security scenarios, again, a very low cost, very flexible solution that allows you to automate that to a high degree.
Pradeep, you want to, so I guess you will refer to the same use case study, but go ahead.
No, I think there is no one application or one service which is the killer app or anything like that. It's really a changing how we do things, and it all has to do with ultimately flexibility and faster realization times, faster provisioning, faster change. So all the tools we can build to help us do that then enable us to build services quicker. Now, I don't know what those services are. I mean, yes, we can repurpose our current services to take advantage of this and do them faster. But there are a whole bunch of services people think up of but have to abandon because by the time you try to implement it, it takes too long and the opportunity is gone. So I think that is the crucial thing, that if we can get to a stage where we can quickly try out a service and withdraw it if it doesn't work, we've as networking providers, we've never had that capability. And in our current world, it seems more and more likely that's what we want to do, because our customer bases are no longer this uniform monolith of customers. Everybody does the same thing. Our customers are segmented in various ways, as ages, business interests, and they use the network very, very differently. If we could customize our service offering logically across the network, dynamically to handle that service segment, that customer segment, that would be ideal. And we're still a long way from that, but hopefully this is getting us there.
So just to tag on to that, I mean, from the enterprise data center customer's point of view, the customers, the people in the data center who are in the enterprise who are the most excited to hear about SDN are the application developers. I mean, they are like, what do you mean? I don't have to go to the networking guy to get my VLAN? I don't have to go to my security firewall guy to get these rules instantiated? So I think that notion that you're the master of your domain and your destiny, I think, to use a bad phrase, but that is an immensely powerful tool. So the application guys, when they see that deploying a 3-tiered application, for example, they could just spin up a VM, spin up network policies on that virtual network, insert their middle boxes, create that application, and do their sandbox, then move to production by just scaling each one of these elements without talking to anybody else in the infrastructure. That's very, very powerful. And I think that vision is something that we cannot disappoint as a community. We cannot disappoint.
Christos?
Yeah, so I would try to build on Bob's question, actually. As I see OCP and bare metal, NFV, and OpenDaylight, what are your predictions for this year, or what you would like to see being accomplished until the next ONS a year from now? What will be your top priority or wish list?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what do you think, or maybe if I can spin it just slightly differently, where do you think SDN should be or would be a year from now? An SDN plus NFV, okay? So Vijay, you want to start?
I think I'll repeat what I've said earlier. So I think we need to show more, better use cases in the enterprise data center so that somebody who doesn't have an army of IT people or networking people can also deploy it. So it has to get more consumable. It has to be better categorized. So as an enterprise data center admin, if I'm going to solve this problem, I know what technologies to use and so on and so forth. So I think making it better consumable and having some real use cases, identifying the business benefits, and getting somebody up here on the stage, which is from an enterprise data center customer point of view, I think will be something good to see at the next.
So that's a good, I think you stated it in a good way in terms of what should be the goal for the community, and that's great. Where do you think community will end up?
So I'm hoping it'll end up there.
Right, understood. Right?
We're all hoping it'll end up there.
But I think there are signs that we're getting there.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of interest.
So you think this is a reach within our reach? That goal is within our reach. And
I don't want to appear like Jim Zemlin, who says 2014 is the year of the Linux desktop every year. So I think I don't want to sound like that, but I think this year we should be seeing some of those. I mean, all of us are seeing trials and POCs. Some of those should be converting to real business value.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think I completely agree. I think what SDN needs now most is actually customer success stories, right? Large production deployments, right. And not of Google, right? I mean, because Google is fantastic, but they're not the mainstream, right? But basically deployments in the mainstream, and I'm optimistic in the next 12 months. We'll see a number of large success stories there.
Okay.
I was wondering, well, some of the cases that we saw throughout the session were the Googles, the Microsofts, and so forth, which are corporations which have fairly large software developing capabilities. And I was wondering if this would not be a limitation for SDN to become mainstream on, let's say, corporations which are not primarily focused on software development, like you name it, like mid-sized corporations and so forth. And what can we do as a community to overcome these kind of limitations? That's the question. What I mean is, like, what is it that we can do?
So I guess to me, if I may step in and see, so I think it is true that Google is a special case, Microsoft is a special case, and so on. But at the same time, there are 2 or 3 benefits that happen because of them doing it. First of all, by listening to them, we realize that, oh, this is possible. Okay, and as you know, they say that once you know something is possible, 50% battle is won. Because before that, for example, today what we heard from Amin or the kind of scale we heard from Microsoft, once you know it is possible, then I'm sure now Verizon and AT&T people are saying, if Google can do it, at least I should be able to do it with the help of IBM. If not, I can't do it on my own. I should be able to do it. So maybe that is the benefit. And we're also learning some other technologies and so on. So in that sense, it is a step in the direction. But anyway, what do you think?
I think it goes back to the same point I was raising earlier, which is Google could do it and it's possible, and that's a good validation of what can be done. But a lot of these enterprises will say, yeah, but that's Google, right? So I think the possibility factor is good, and then, like you said, a lot of the vendors need to step up and make it more consumable so that it's easily deployable and show some value but I think the excitement is there. So to the point around the software development aspect of it, I think those are the right kind of people who would want to use SDN, and I think we need to hit that crowd.
This may be an imperfect analogy, but if you look at MapReduce, which was the Google technology, at some point that became Hadoop, and then it became a packaged Hadoop by somebody like Cloudera or so, right, with an app on top. Maybe a service provider behind it who can help you deploy this thing. And at that point, really, we saw wide-scale enterprise adoption. I think it's the same thing, right? I think you're absolutely correct that we should look to the hyperscale guys and what they do, because we can learn a ton from them. I mean, they're often ahead of the curve, but the system that they built for them does not translate one-to-one to medium enterprise, not by any metric. They want, instead of APIs, they want a UI. Instead of something which is highly extensible in the platform, they want something that's much more turnkey and solves a particular problem well. So I think it's our job as software developers to really take products and polish them to make them installable by anyone and manageable by anyone, not just by one of the big guys.
Oh, I think,
yeah, we're talking about acceptance types of things, and there are a couple things that kind of were disturbing. When the venture capitalist got to the security slide, he said, well, we really don't have an answer for this. And then the Goldman Sachs guy was talking in deference, like when you talk about getting excited about a user being able to set up connections, a Goldman Sachs, unless the security's there, if someone could get into Goldman Sachs, that $1 billion you said you wanted, that guy might be able to get, and the Goldman Sachs would be very nervous about that. Plus, downtime, a minute downtime, that's $1 billion. So the concept of a high availability controlling, you have to worry about the expanse of the network, because to get a complete snapshot, that's one of the things they studied 30 years ago. It's impossible because the speed of light is 186,000 miles an hour. It's not just a good idea, it's the law. So you're going to be stuck with getting a snapshot. So the question basically is, are you all satisfied with the high availability and the instantaneous, well, that's wrong, a good snapshot of a network, and again, the security that's there? Because, like I said, when that slide came up, it kind of like threw it to the side, and I didn't like that being thrown to the side. Look for your good comments.
So I think we are getting there. So it's not, we don't have all the solutions today, but we do recognize the problems, and there are solutions being proposed. It's mostly a productization statement, I would say, that is being raised. So it took a lot of years for traditional networking to get where it is. And I would assume it won't be an easy ride for you in SDN. But it gives you a new paradigm, it gives you new tools, it gives you a new way of dealing with your network in a very much holistic way. So it is a different and a better way of doing things, but making it mature is going to take time. It's not an easy shortcut.
Yeah. All I'll say is that security and reliability are on the top of our concerns as speaking for the carrier community. When we're looking at all of this, those are things we're trying to address right up front. So yes, not everything is answered yet, but they're definitely part of our requirements, and we're trying to find out how to exactly implement those.
Okay, maybe last question and then we should try to close them.
Okay, thank you. Maybe this is just naivety on my part, but I had a question for the vendors and one for Pradeep. For the vendors, I think the one thing I'm struggling with is how do you build viable businesses out of everything that's happening in the industry? Everything we've heard of the past 2 days, hardware is getting commoditized, massive deflationary pressure. The controller market, you've got open source alternatives. I'm not sure of very many companies, I'm not aware of very many companies that have built truly formidable, viable business models off of open source. So I'm just trying to figure out where's the money? Is it in the apps layer? Do we see Big Switch building a whole bunch of apps? And then Pradeep, just a quick one for you. This whole notion of open is great, but from a Verizon perspective, do you really want to deal with best of breed 15, 20, 30 vendors? Or again, do you see yourself sort of dealing with 2, 3 main vendors who sort of will be your main points of contact and sort of the choke to the throat to choke if something goes wrong?
Yes, go ahead.
So, do you want to go first, or?
Okay.
So starting with the business model question. I mean, let me make a simple analogy here to the PC revolution, right? So the server PC is getting, like, the Sun Microsystems model doesn't work anymore. Spark Station, Spark Chip, Solaris. Instead, we now have a server with Linux. And can you still build a viable business model? I think the answer is clearly yes, right? Last time I checked, Oracle and SAP and a couple of others, they were doing, just fine. Thank you. I mean, I think from our perspective, the hardware commoditizing means that I'm not sure I would start a company at this point that builds switches, right? Top of rack switches. That would be a pretty tough business to be in. And the software on there, we may see more open source or not. I think there will be, but it's not entirely clear yet. But on the controller side, even if a controller platform, if OpenDaylight becomes the standard and everybody builds on top of that, I think there's still a lot of value you can add on top, right? I mean, taking a controller platform and building something on top that, for example, provides high availability, secure, as we just heard, right? Data center fabric is very difficult. And I don't see this getting commoditized in the near future.
Yeah, I think it's the same in all of our industries, that the value is shifting up. We used to make our money in connecting people and providing the basic communications. That's not a value anymore. Value is shifting up. So that's going to happen in this space too. As far as how we address the problem of multiple suppliers, etc., that's not a new problem. In many areas of our network, we do have multiple vendors, and we come up with business arrangements to resolve that, either doing integration ourselves, in some cases getting an integrator, in some cases working through someone else. So I think it'll depend on the specific case. So it's not a new problem. And best of breed will be something we'll look for, but you temper that with the usability and the operability of that. This may be the highest performance software for that particular function available, but if I cannot use it and I cannot operate and cannot manage it, it's no longer the best of breed for me. So I think we'll temper it with those kinds of considerations.
Okay, so you guys have any 1 minute or less closing statement you want to make? Any departing, whatever, wisdom you want to share?
We have 0 minutes left.
I know, but that's okay. So anything you want? So that's what I'm saying, less than a minute. Okay, so less than a minute. Do you want to say something? Share some wisdom? No?
I think it's been a great event, and all the things we said that we expect by the next ONS, let's hope we achieve that.
Okay, so yeah, so I want to thank you all for participating in this panel, and I want to thank you all for coming to ONS and sticking around until the end. And I don't know whether Sadef and VB are here. I want to thank them because, I can't see, okay. So if you can stand up. So I think I want to give them a round of applause because those are the people. There is no light on their faces, so you can't see them. But believe me, I get to be on the stage more than they do, I mean by a huge fraction, but they are the people who do all the work, and they are the ones who put up the show and try to create as good a user experience or attendee experience that you can think of. And so without them, we cannot run ONS. So you should thank them if you get a chance. And again, so this is end of ONS 2014, and hope to see you again next time. Okay, thanks.